Hi, it's Dr. Michael Ling here, and in this video we're going to talk about full arch funnels. What exactly is a funnel when we're talking about full arch sales and marketing, and why do they matter? So the word funnel these days is a popular buzzword thrown around by marketing companies, I think, to make themselves sound smart and important, and to make you feel dumb so that you have to hire them to build a funnel. But a funnel is not complicated. But a funnel is really a very simple concept. It's simply the journey that a patient takes from having no idea you exist all the way to the case being accepted and paid for and the patient laying back in your chair ready for treatment. And whether you know it or not, and whether you call it that or not, you already have a funnel. Your patients do take a journey from start to finish. And typically it looks something like this, where the patient starts on the left side of the screen having no idea you exist, to all the way on the right side of the screen where the patient has paid, accepted treatment, and is ready to start their case. And along the way, there are several stops in their journey. In your office, they probably find out about you by an ad or maybe a friend or family, and then they probably visit your website. And if they like what they have to see in your website, maybe they check out your Instagram, and then eventually they call your office, they come in for a consult, and then they accept treatment. So this is the journey the patient takes from having no idea you exist on this end to all the way on this end when the case is started. But in real life, though, this journey doesn't exist in a linear path. One way to visualize the real journey a patient takes is to compare it to a funnel. The way a funnel works is you put lots and lots of water in the top and you get a little bit dripping out the bottom. And this is how the patient journey works. So here's how your funnel currently works. A lot of people see your ad, but not everybody who sees that ad will click on the ad and visit your website. Some small percent of those people who see the ad will go to your website. And then some small percent of those people who visit the website will end up calling. And of the people who call, some small percent of those people will end up coming for a consult. And then the people that show up for a consult, not all of them are accepting treatment. So some small percent of those people who come for a consult end up in treatment. So this is why it's called a funnel. It's shaped like a funnel, where you have to have a lot of people see your ad to get just a couple of people drip out the end as actual treatment. So now that you have an understanding of what the patient journey is and why we call it a funnel, now let's talk about who cares. Why does this even matter when it comes to full arch marketing? I'm going to go through 3 reasons why it's really powerful to think of your patient journey like a funnel so that you can attract and do more full arch cases. First, it's important to understand that a funnel is a series of steps, and each step impacts the other steps that are downstream. For example, if your funnel looks something like this, where you go from an ad to a website, to a call, to a consult, and then to treatment. All of these steps are connected. So if you want more treatment at the bottom to come out, one way to do that is just to do more ads. And in theory, if you had a decently working funnel and you doubled your ad spend, you would probably close to double the amount of... Now, the math isn't one-to-one because there are leaks and inefficiencies all along this funnel. But the effect remains the same. More ads means more people visit your website, which means more people call, which means more people come for a consult, which means more arches done. Of course, that's pretty obvious. But when you break your funnel down into individual steps, some less obvious opportunities become apparent. Because just spending more money, because of course, you could do more arches just by spending more money on your ads. And that's what every marketing company will try to get you to do. They'll say, Doc, right now you're spending $20,000 a month in ads and you're getting 10 arches per month. If you want to do 20 arches per month, just spend $40,000 in ads. And of course, that's easy for them to say because it's not their money. And it will probably work. You may not double the number of arches by doubling your ad spend, but it will probably go up. What the marketing companies don't want you to know, though, is that's not the only way to increase the number of arches. Because here's another way to do it. In this example, why don't we keep the number of ads the same? We don't want to spend any more money on ads, but we want to get more arches out the bottom of this funnel. Remember from earlier in this video how we talked about some percent of people taking the next step in the funnel. So for example, some percent of people who visit your website will end up calling your office. What if we could just increase that percentage? And we don't need to make huge improvement. And if we could optimize your website, that would mean more phone calls, and it impacts everything downstream of this step. More phone calls means more consults, which means more treatment. And you can optimize dozens of areas all along this funnel in each of these steps. There are literally dozens of opportunities to get more treatment out of your funnel without spending any more money on ads. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in this video. The second reason why visualizing your patient journey as a funnel is very powerful is because you can alter that patient's journey to make it more effective. You can add or remove steps. For example, let's look at the standard funnel again, where you have an ad to a website, to a call, to a consult, and then to treatment. This is just the standard funnel that pretty much every dentist has, whether they're doing general dentistry or full arch marketing. So what happens if you discover that you're doing a fair number of consults, but the consults are really poor quality? They're people who are just not appropriate for treatment or just have no ability to pay for treatment. Well, in this situation, it might be wise to add a step somewhere in the middle here to help screen some of these patients. It might be doing something like having one of your staff members reach out to them and do almost a pre-consult over the phone. And in other videos, we'll talk about how we in our office screen our patients for things like appropriateness and affordability. But adding this extra step right here does make your funnel a little bit more complicated, but the result will be higher quality consults. Now here's another example. What happens if you have lots of people who are clicking your ad and going to your website, but almost nobody is calling? Something is happening right here that's preventing people from making this call. Well, again, this may be an opportunity to add another step right here. Because when you think about it, it can be a really big leap for somebody who has no idea you exist to calling you and making an appointment. They don't know you. They don't trust you enough yet. So sometimes what we'll do is add a step in between the website and the phone call. And adding an in-between step makes it easier for the patient to take multiple small steps instead of one giant leap. And this small step could be something like an info guide. I've seen quizzes work, or something like a price guide. So in this case, this website is not offering a consultation. Instead, it's offering something else that's a lot easier for the patient to go ahead with. And then later on, we can ask them to call or make an appointment. And lastly, visualizing your patient journey as a funnel is super important because you can unclog bottlenecks. Like I said earlier in this video, if you want to do more arches, the marketing companies will tell you just spend more money and you'll do more arches. But that's a really expensive way to do it, and it doesn't always work because oftentimes the ad is not, the bottleneck is somewhere else in the system. And no matter how much more liquid you pour into this funnel, there's a constriction right here. And unless you widen that constriction, it's just a complete waste of money to keep pouring water in the top of the funnel. And in my experience, when talking to other dentists who are doing full arch marketing, it's rarely an ad spend issue. There's a bottleneck somewhere else in their funnel, and they should not spend another dollar on marketing until they identify and unclog that bottleneck. You can imagine what it would be like if you had a funnel in your hands and it was constricted somewhere in the middle and you kept just trying to dump more and more water in. The water would just spill all over the place and it wouldn't come out the bottom of your funnel. No matter how much water you keep pouring on the top, the same amount keeps dripping out the bottom because there's a constriction, there's a bottleneck somewhere. So how do you identify where that bottleneck is so that you can unclog it and get more arches without spending any more money on ads? Here's how I would do it. So let's draw again the simplest typical funnel. You have some sort of ad, and once somebody clicks on that ad, they visit a website, and then somehow they end up as a consult here, and then they end up doing treatment. If you've been doing this long enough, you start to see standards and patterns that emerge. And I'm going to run through some of the rough math just to give you an idea of how the numbers actually work when flowing through this funnel. If you place an ad, then having something like a 15% click-through rate is pretty good. And what that means is of all the people who see your ad, 15% of them click that ad. And I would be pretty happy with that. Now, of the people who go to your website, not very many of them are going to take the next step. Depending on the design, the content, and the offer on your website, it would be great if you got something like 20% to sign up on your website. Now, this is not 20% of visitors becoming consults. That would be nearly impossible. This is 20% of people signing up for some sort of offer, whether it's a quiz or price guide or something like that. Now, of the people who become leads, in other words, they've given you their personal information so that you can contact them, maybe 10% of those make an appointment. And of the people who make an appointment, maybe 80% of those people actually show up for their appointment. And of the people who show up for the appointment, because 20% probably no-show, maybe 50% of those are qualified. Meaning they're good quality consults, they have urgency, they're clinically appropriate, and they have money. And of the people who are qualified, maybe 50% of those people end up doing treatment. This is really rough math. The numbers are not exact. It's just to give you an idea of how patients get filtered out at each step of the funnel. So if you have 10,000 people who see your ad, about 15% of them will click on the ad and visit your website. So that would be 1,500 people. And of the 1,500 people who visit the website, about 20% of them will give you their personal information in exchange for some sort of quiz or guide or something like that. So that would be 300 people. And of those 300 people who become leads, about 10% of them will end up making an appointment, which now you're down to 30 people. And of the 30 people who make an appointment, about 80% of them will show up. So you'll have 24 consults. And of those 24 consults, about half of them would be qualified. The other half are going to be garbage consults. So that's going to be 12 qualified consults. And of those 12 qualified consults, they're not all going to say yes. You'd be lucky if half of them say yes. So that gives you 6 arches in the end. So now that you see how this rough math works, you can look for bottlenecks if you know your numbers and know how your funnel works. So for example, if your ads are not getting a 15% click-through rate, they're only getting a 5% click-through rate, then there may be a problem with your ads. It may be a problem with your targeting, it may be a problem with your keywords, maybe you're advertising on the wrong platform, maybe it's the wrong message. There's all kinds of things that you can adjust to get your ads converting at about 15%. And that goes for anywhere in this funnel. All along these numbers here. These are approximate numbers, but if your numbers are way, way off, then that's a red flag that there's a possible bottleneck there. So if you're getting 1,500 people who visit your website, but only 5% of people are becoming leads, then that's another sign of a bottleneck, that the website is not working properly. And it doesn't matter how many ads you pay for and how many people you drive to this website, it's just not converting. Or maybe the bottleneck is somewhere lower down in the funnel. So if you're getting lots of qualified people, but you're not closing at least half of them, maybe you're closing 10% of these people instead of 15%, then don't spend more money on ads. You should work on opening this bottleneck first, getting this number closer to 50%. Because if you can open this bottleneck from 10% to 50%, that's a 5 times increase in the number of arches you're doing without spending a dime on marketing. So knowing your numbers is how you know where the bottleneck is. But once you know what the bottleneck is, what do you do about it? And that's where our full arch funnel comes into play. Because what we've done here is broken down every step in the funnel and identified all the different levers that you can pull to improve that step of the funnel. And as you can see, there are dozens of opportunities here, and there are even more that just wouldn't fit on this slide. And remember, the amazing thing about these funnels is that everything at the top of the funnel impacts everything else downstream. So you can make a very small improvement at the top, and that ends up with a huge exponential improvement at the bottom. And also keep in mind that all of these levers that you can pull, these are ways that you can open up bottlenecks in your funnel and get way more arches without spending another dime on your ad spend. I hope this video makes sense to you and was helpful. If you have questions about funnels, how they work, how to identify bottlenecks, and how to do more full arch implant cases without spending any more money on ads, then leave a comment below.